Hey, welcome to Angling Acumen. And today's topic is going to be the bass lakes of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. Now, the Chequamegon-Nicolet encompasses over 1.5 million acres in northern Wisconsin. The Chequamegon sector up in northwestern Wisconsin, with significant portions in Ashland, Bayfield, Sawyer, and several other counties. The Nicolet sector in northeastern Wisconsin, including a number of counties, including Vilas and Forest County. Now, according to the U.S. Forest Service, the Chequamegon-Nicolet contains over 600 lakes that are 10 acres or larger. So that's not even including a number of lakes that are under 10 acres that may offer fishing opportunity. Now, the majority of these lakes, very high percentage of them, have largemouth bass in them, and a significant number of them also have smallmouth bass. Now, I divide the bass lakes of the Chequamegon-Nicolet into 4 categories based on access. The first category are lakes that have drive-up access, often paved roads right up to near the access, and you have an improved access, concrete ramps or whatever. The second type is going to have usually a dirt or gravel road up to the access, and then sometimes the road just simply ends at the lake shore, and then you launch your boat. There's not an improved access per se, and that can restrict what type of boats may or may not be able to be launched there. The third type is you have drive-up access, also depending on what kind of vehicle you have. It might be something where you want a four-wheel drive vehicle or something with high ground clearance, depending on the road conditions. And then once you get there, there's no boat landing really per se of anything. You're going to have something, like car toppers or kayaks, canoes, john boats, something like that, that you can carry over in. And then the fourth category is strictly walk-in access. So if you use any type of watercraft, it's going to be something that you carry in, like a kayak or canoe, or something that you use some type of a non-motorized cart or something like that to get it back in there. Now, what I'm not going to do in today's video is present a list of bass lakes to go fish in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. A number of my favorite lakes are in some cases quite small, and so possibly sending increased fishing pressure to these lakes wouldn't be in the lake's best interest. What I am going to do is I'm going to show the process that I use for locating potential lakes to fish and how I go about following through on that one. Now, I happen to live right next to the border for the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, and so it's easy for me to locate these lakes and check them out. But even if you live in Naperville, Illinois, and you make fishing trips up to northern Wisconsin or vacation up in northern Wisconsin, you could use the same exact process where you're living right now, find these lakes, and then when you travel to the area, follow through on them. Now, there's 3 main resources I use when I'm trying to identify these lakes. The first thing you need is a decent mapping of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. You could go right to the U.S. Forest Service website. You can use something like Google Earth, or you can even use one of the apps, the hunting apps that are popular, such as onX, which is going to show you the boundaries of the National Forest, and then it's going to have the type of mapping that's going to show you the waterways within that map. Now, one word of warning with the actual mapping that the Forest Service features on their website is I noticed a number of the lakes are labeled incorrectly. For example, you might have 2 lakes, and the correct name for this lake is over on this lake, and this lake doesn't even have a label on it. And so I was surprised. I found at least a half a dozen errors like that just in the area of the National Forest where I live. So you want to kind of take their mapping with a grain of salt. I found something like Google Earth or the DeLorme mapping, or some of those are much more accurate. Now, the second resource I use quite a bit is on the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources website. And one of the features they have on that is their Find a Lake feature. And you go into that and you key in the name of a lake, and then it'll bring up, unfortunately, a lot of lakes in Wisconsin have the same lake. For example, you just punch in Bass Lake in that feature, and you're going to get a monstrous listing of lakes. Or Long Lake, there's a tremendous number of long lakes in Wisconsin, or rangeline lakes and things like that. But you find it in there, the lake that you're looking at, you find a particular lake in the forest, and you want to get an idea of what's in that lake, the size of the lake, whether it's got access on it, things like that. It'll be on that Find a Lake feature. There is a little bit of a downside to the Find a Lake feature, and I'll explain that. Back in the 1960s, the Wisconsin legislature mandated that the Department of Natural Resources survey and look at all the waterways in the state of Wisconsin. It didn't matter if it was a little pond or if it was something like the size of the Chippewa flowage. They were mandated to check every one of these waterways in the state. And what they ended up doing is they compiled a summary. It was like a booklet for each county of the state. And they were labeled like the surface water resources of Vilas County, the surface water resources of Bayfield County. And all this survey work for every individual lake was put into there. And it was things like the size of the lake, the depth of the lake, the water clarity, water hardness, and then the type of bottom composition that was in the lake, and then what the fishery was that comprised that lake, which was really great at the time. The problem is, for example, on this Find a Lake resource, not all lakes are continually surveyed. In fact, some lakes possibly even haven't been surveyed since then. So some of that information is dated. If you bring up a popular lake that's, decent size, the DNR is doing surveys on it regularly. For example, some of the key waterways in the state, like the Turtle Flambeau flowage or the Winnebago system, or, key lakes like that, they're surveyed all the time. But you have a 45-acre lake located in the National Forest, it's possible that lake hasn't been surveyed since the 1960s. So some of that information is a little dated. You even look at the maps that they show on the Find a Lake site. They'll show a map for most lakes on there. Just about every lake will have a map. Some of these lakes, you look at the date when the map was created, some of them were created in the 1940s. And even your most basic low-price sonar on a boat today is probably a lot more sophisticated than the equipment they were using back then. And so you are going to maybe see some issues with that too. So you got to kind of do that with a grain of salt. It's particularly some of these more isolated, out-of-the-way lakes that you're going to find. But it gives you a baseline. It gives you something to build on and get an idea, of what the lake might be like before you get to it. Now, if it's a larger lake or a lake that seems a fair amount of, fishing use, or there's even some lake properties on it, and you're going to see some of that. You're going to have the National Forest border some lakes, and it shares it. Some portions of the border of that lake are going to be National Forest. Some portions of it, might be private land. Some of it's grandfathered in, or it just might be the way that the National Forest was acquired. So you're going to see some of that too. But many of them, the somewhat larger lakes, they get surveyed regularly, and you could find those surveys on the Department of Natural Resources site. And so I've used that for some of the other lakes that I have fished. I, try to see what the most recent survey work has showed, with respect to the bass fisheries. And a lot of times that's been a good clue on, lakes that are worth investigating. Okay, so how do I actually go about finding lakes? And every year I always make a list, and I'll have a short list of several lakes that I want to fish this year, lakes that I've never fished before. And that's what I'll kind of spend some of my winter months doing, is researching them and making that list. And I'll look on the map and I'll find lakes that I haven't fished, and then I'll check them out, see what they are for location and size. And then I'll go into these resources. I'll go into the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources site, see what I can find out about it. And then I'll just kind of go from there and think, what, this lake might even be off the radar enough that it might be a decent fishery. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not. So that you're going to see that. I think this is the fun part of doing this. Some lakes you go and they're going to be okay. Maybe you'll fish them again, maybe you won't. Some of them will be pretty darn good. You think, yeah, I'm definitely going to come back here and fish here once in a while. And then some of them are absolute gems. And then that's what makes this fun. This is something I keep pursuing, because for every so many lakes you go, you're going to find another gem, to add to your list. Now, as with the federal site and the state site, I said you have to take some of that information, a little bit lightly, because social media is another one that you want to be really careful with. And I'll give you an example. One of the lakes I fished for the first time last year, for the heck of it, I went out to see what was out there with social media. And I went to one of those sites where people go in and talk about what they've caught on a certain lake, and how they did and all that, and share fishing information. And this particular lake, there was a number of comments where it's just got small bass in it, and 20 years ago this was a great lake, it's not that great anymore. And I was surprised, a number of comments that were derogatory about it, but I decided to still go check it out anyway, and it turned out to be one of those gems like I was talking about. In fact, I used footage I shot on this lake for several of the videos that we posted last year. And so again, be careful, what you do see and take on social media. And that can go both ways. They could be bragging the heck out of the lake. And there are people that will be a little dishonest in that respect. I know that for a fact that people will definitely embellish on social media about certain waterways and fisheries too. So you go out there, see what's out there, but again, you want to take it all with a grain of salt, because you could find something that's just totally contradictory to what you find out there on social media. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at two different lakes that I researched in this fashion and then went out to see what was actually there and what we had. And they're two very different lakes. One's about a 1,000-acre lake, and part of it's bordered by the National Forest. In fact, the public access is actually maintained by the National Forest. And it had fairly recent DNR survey work on it, so I can go in and see what the DNR found when they researched it, and drive up access right to it. The other lake, very different. It had a dirt access road to it, and it had an unimproved landing when you get to it. The lake was actually under 100 acres and hadn't been surveyed probably since the 1960s when the original legislative mandate came out. Hadn't been surveyed in a long time. The map that was posted online, at the DNR's website, was incredibly inaccurate. But had a very interesting fishery when I got to that too. So we're going to take a look at both of those two different situations. Again, this first lake is over 1,000 acres, has a drive-up access, and a pretty good bass fishery. The biggest surprise is how few other bass fishermen I encounter on this lake, as most fishing pressure is directed at walleye and panfish. Now, there are lakes in the Chequamegon-Nicolet that are very popular with bass fishermen, and on any given day you may have to wait your turn to launch your boat. But fortunately for me, this isn't one of those lakes. All right, first bass of the morning. Hopefully we can get a bunch more. That's not a bad one. See if we can duplicate that. There's one. Might have been the one that gave himself away. Alright. They're liking the Houdini sticko all of a sudden. Got a slow start. Now they're popping. Now, the second lake we're featuring had to be accessed by driving a long, single-lane, unimproved road through the National Forest. Upon reaching the lake, there was an unimproved landing. While by no means a trophy lake, it turned out to be full of 12 to 14-inch bass with the occasional larger fish. Oh, come on. There you go. Be cooperative. Little guy. want grandma. There we go. Getting a little bigger. Getting up there incrementally. Alright. Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest bass. Just using a VMC Moon Eye jig with BPS speed shad 3" on a jig spinner. Damage control. There we go. All right, we can get another one. Wow. Today. Come on. Ooh. Fish on. Gotta fix the camera. What do we got? But there is a category of lake in the Chequamegon-Nicolet that's just full of fish like these. They're numbers lakes. There's an occasional big one with some of them, but overall you can just catch fish like this. Great place when you just catch a bunch of fish and get it out of your system, or bringing a kid that you're getting started. Most of them, they're soft water seepage lakes. Fairly clear water, not a lot of weeds, not a lot of structure. In fact, we're actually fishing just right out in the middle of the lake. Pretty bland, you know, occasional little patch of like 4 stalks of weed or whatever, but not a lot. And just randomly drifting and casting up here. Just using a jig spinner with a swim bait. Another good bait I've had success doing that with is flipless crankbait. Just randomly casting out in the middle of a lake here like this and catching these fish. Again, not necessarily much for size, but just a lot of action and a lot of fun. Jeez, this is a hit. Stay on. This one might be a little bigger than average. So let's turn the boat bigger. Well, not really. Just fighting bigger. Oh, maybe it is. Oh, it's a little bit bigger. As we said in the beginning of this video, there are over 600 lakes in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest that are over 10 acres, and a very high percentage of those lakes have bass. And guess what? Every one of them's waiting for you to come out and give them a try. Hey, if you like today's show, why don't you click on subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Angling Acumen.